This is the early morning of the 7th of December. This will be part 2 of why Trump freed the Honduran narco gun-running terrorist. So sit back and have a listen. It'll play for around 12 minutes. I'm doing this in 2 parts because I don't trust the software. Have a listen.
So Trump is insanely claiming that left-wing governments in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba are so-called narco-communists. There's no evidence whatsoever. These are the governments that have been fighting drug cartels, which are overwhelmingly working with right-wing corrupt oligarchs and millionaires and billionaires and big corporations. They're the ones attacking the left in many countries across Latin America. The drug cartels are allied with the big landlords and the oligarchs, the right-wingers, not the left. And yet Trump is proudly saying that the U.S. is going to support the drug dealers, the right-wing drug traffickers against the left in the name of fighting drugs. I mean, it is so absolutely crazy. Again, you have to be a child to believe this nonsense propaganda. But Trump said, quote, "I hope the people of Honduras vote for freedom and democracy and elect Tito Asfura president," end quote. So this is the Orwellian propaganda. Vote for the corrupt drug traffickers to support freedom and democracy. And after publicly campaigning for that right-wing candidate, Trump again meddled in Honduras' elections. On the 28th of November, he threatened Honduras. Listen to this message. Trump said, quote, "If Tito Asfura wins for president of Honduras because the United States has so much confidence in him, his policies, and what he'll do for the great people of Honduras, we will be very supportive. If he doesn't win, the United States will not be throwing good money after bad because a wrong leader can only bring catastrophic results to a country," end quote. This is a blatant threat by the most powerful country on earth, the United States, threatening the small country of Honduras, saying, if the people do not vote for this corrupt U.S. puppet linked to drug cartels, the U.S. will punish Honduras. There will be catastrophic results. But if the people elect this right-wing drug trafficker, then the U.S. will support Honduras. Trump said, quote, "The United States will work closely with him in order to ensure this success," end quote. And then he announced he would be releasing the notorious drug trafficker Juan Orlando Hernandez. I mean, the message could not be any clearer. The U.S. government is publicly broadcasting to all of the drug traffickers and corrupt right-wing oligarchs in Latin America that they should steal elections and the U.S. government will support them. Donald Trump will give 100% support to these drug traffickers. And in fact, the left-wing presidential candidate in the Honduran elections, Risi Moncada, she and the left-wing Libre Party publicly came out and they alleged fraud yet again. After the U.S.-backed coup in 2009 and the stolen U.S.-backed fraudulent elections in 2013 and then again in 2017, now they're saying once again that there is fraud and they have presented some serious evidence. For instance, they showed that 2,859 vote tally sheets did not actually have biometric confirmation, which is required in Honduras. They represent roughly 25% of the overall votes. So these are votes that could potentially be fraudulent. Moreover, a member of the National Electoral Council of Honduras, which oversees the election results, an electoral counselor published video online showing how the results transmission system was changing the votes for some candidates and then giving them to the right-wing candidates to steal the election. These are videos posted by people working at the National Electoral Council.
Watch what magnesium does to...
Ad just popped up.
I mentioned the name Xiomara Castro and how in 2013, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the U.S.-backed drug lord, stole the election from her using drug money. Well, in 2021, the coup regime was so unpopular and so corrupt, it was falling apart, and it collapsed, and the U.S. government imprisoned Hernandez, its former ally. And finally, Xiomara Castro was allowed to win the first free and fair democratic election in a decade in Honduras. However, as soon as she came to power, the U.S. government did everything it could to destabilize her left-wing government, especially because Honduras has been an ally of Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And a month before the November 2025 elections, the president, Xiomara Castro, revealed that the government had obtained dozens of recordings showing how right-wing U.S.-backed oligarchic groups in Honduras were conspiring to carry out fraud yet again to steal the elections. And according to the leaked recordings, they said that the strategy was to hack the transmission result system to change the votes, which is exactly what these videos from the National Electoral Council show, which is very strong evidence that once again there was fraud, just like there was fraud in the 2013 and 2017 elections that put in power this US-backed narco dictator whom Trump just released from prison. I mean, it is just so blatant. It's in broad daylight. And I'm recording this video on the 3rd of December, 4 days after the Honduran elections. And there still is no official winner because the website of the National Electoral Council crashed. No one could actually see the results. And because two other candidates both claimed victory, including the Trump-backed right-wing candidate, Tito Asfura, and also the center-right candidate, Salvador Nasrallah, who is more closely linked to the U.S. Democratic Party, whereas Asfura is the candidate of the Republican Party. But they're both right-leaning, pro-U.S. candidates. And they both claim to supposedly have gotten around 40% of the vote, while they absurdly claim that supposedly the Libre Party, the left-wing anti-imperialist party of current President Xiomara Castro, supposedly got fewer than 20% of the votes, which makes no sense because independent polls done by foreign polling groups like the Mexico-based polling group Mitofsky, which was founded by a U.S. pollster, they found at the end of April 2025 that Xiomara Castro, the president of Honduras, had a 64% approval rating, and surveys done by the polling agency T Research found consistently from September until late October 2025 in the lead up to the election that between 44 and 49% of Hondurans said they were going to vote for the left-wing candidate, Rishi Moncada, from the Libre Party, and the right-wing Trump-backed candidate, Tito Asfura, only had 18% support, whereas the center-right candidate, Nasrallah, had support of between 27% and 30%. So the supposed results that cannot be independently verified because there are so many irregularities and the website crashed and the system was allegedly hacked, according to these reports, no one can verify these so-called results that claim that the left-wing candidate, who had support of nearly half the population, supposedly got fewer than 20% of the votes. It's completely absurd. Moreover, even if you don't believe the surveys done by polling agencies and you claim they have a political bias, well, you can look, for instance, at the website Polymarket. This is a betting website, and this website has been very accurate at predicting events in the short term, not in the long term, but surveys found that in the short term, it has a 94% accuracy. And why is that? It's because people around the world are putting money on the line. If they're wrong, they lose money. That's a very good incentive to be accurate. And also, it's a form of corruption because what happens is you have people around the world and governments and institutions who have insider information and they make bets based on that insider information. So if you look in the month leading up to the presidential election in Honduras, we saw that the left-wing candidate, Rishi Moncada, and the center-right candidate, Salvador Nasrallah, were both neck and neck at about 40% of a likelihood of winning the election. And that was based on all of the polling done. Again, these are people who are putting money on the line, betting on this. Meanwhile, the Trump-backed right-wing candidate, Asfura, about 14% of people were betting that he would win the election. Again, this is based on the polls that were done. However, suddenly, on the day of the election, Asfura only had an 11% likelihood of winning, but out of nowhere, it shot up to 93% on the night of the election. And then suddenly, the likelihood of the left-wing candidate, Moncada, winning went down to nearly 0%. So what happened? Did people have insider knowledge? How did the candidate that went a month with having a very low percentage chance of winning suddenly go to being by far the most likely candidate to win, according to these betting markets, which have an over 90% accuracy in the short term? This is extremely suspicious. And again, when you look back at the very recent history of the U.S. government backing a coup against Honduras' democratically elected left-wing president, Manuel Zelaya, in 2009, and then the U.S. government backing the narco dictatorship as it stole 2 elections in 2013 and 2017 with blatant fraud carried out in broad daylight. Everyone in the world could see it. And then you look at what's happening in the 2025 elections when Trump is blatantly meddling and he releases the narco dictator Hernandez from prison. I mean, you have to be a child to actually believe the narrative that is being sold to us from the U.S. government. This news.
It's insane. Trump's insane.
And the last thing that I'll say here before I conclude is, if you know anything about the history of U.S. meddling in Latin America, of U.S. imperialism, you know that the U.S. government has backed dozens of right-wing coups across Latin America against democratically elected left-wing leaders in pretty much every country in Latin America. The U.S. government has been the main enemy of democracy in Latin America and the global South for decades, propping up corrupt right-wing dictatorships and drug dealers. And Honduras is only the latest example of this. But what's so inspiring is the bravery of the people of Latin America and the bravery of the people of Honduras, a country that I have visited multiple times, and I've interviewed some of the victims of the US-backed coup in 2009, whose family members and friends lost their lives. And the democratically elected left-wing president, Manuel Zelaya, who was overthrown in the 2009 US-backed coup, he has been bravely speaking out and standing up for the sovereignty of his country. By the way, his wife, Xiomara Castro, is the democratically elected president of Honduras, whose left-wing party is now once again saying there was a US-backed fraud. And this is what Manuel Zelaya said, the president who was overthrown by the US. He said, with the interference of Donald Trump and his pardon of HO, that is J-O-H. That's the acronym typically used in Honduras to refer to Juan Orlando Hernandez, HO. He said, with the interference of Donald Trump and his pardon of HO, the desperate bipartisanship imposes an electoral coup against Risi, which is the candidate, Risi Moncada, the left-wing candidate of the Libre Party. And when he says bipartisanship, he's referring to the 2 right-leaning pro-US parties, the National Party of Trump-backed candidate Asfura and the center-right Liberal Party of Nasrallah. But Zelaya pointed out that polls show that at the least, Xiomara Castro, the president, has the support of at least 55% of the population. And he's...
What's insane is that Trump is blowing up people. I think they're close to 100 that they've hit with Hellfire missiles. And he released this Honduran drug lord that was serving a 45-year prison sentence. You can't have it both ways, Donald. We got to get this moron out of office. But we don't want to get J.D. Vance into office. So what do? I'll attach the link. Let me know what you think. And thanks for listening.